You're listening to Best Practices with Kenny Berger. On this podcast, we talk with the country's top trial lawyers about their approaches to every aspect of practice, from case selection to closing argument. Thank you so much for being here. And our guest today is a wonderful trial lawyer who practices primarily in Maine, Ms. Meryl Poulin. Meryl, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Kenny. I was actually, for a different reason, listening to your podcast just yesterday. I was listening to the episode you recorded with Rex Paris back, it was probably maybe 3 years ago at this point, but I thought, wow, I'm going to be on tomorrow. That's so awesome. Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, thank you for being here. It's funny, Rex was kind enough to stay for a while, and he was wanting to talk and we were wanting to listen. So we did what became 2 episodes, but we kind of have required listening for the lawyers here. And Rex Paris is amongst you must listen to these episodes.
I understand why.
Yeah. Well, Meryl, tell us a little bit about you and a little bit about your practice.
Sure. I was born and pretty much raised in the state of Maine. I went to law school in Maine. I was one of those freakish people that knew before going to law school that I wanted to do trial work. I honestly really did. And when I got into law school, as it turned out, that was the only thing I was any interested in and any good at. And afterwards, I worked at a big firm for a few years, actually doing medical malpractice defense work. And I enjoyed that. And it was through that process that I got to know Ben Gideon and Taylor Asen. Back in 2020, founded the law firm Gideon Asen. And when I got word they had left their old law firm, they were starting their own firm, I thought, oh boy, I've got to be in on that. Like I think what they're trying to do. Here we are about 5 years into that journey. I'm happy to say that I'm a partner and trial lawyer at Gideon Asen in Auburn, Maine. We focus on plaintiff side, personal injury and medical malpractice. And that's the bulk of what I do.
Meryl, what was it about medical malpractice that drew you in? I mean, because even doing it out of school and working at a big firm, it's not as if there weren't additional areas that you could have at this point gone into. But what is it about medical malpractice that made you decide to make that one of the centerpieces of your practice?
Yeah. As I was thinking through like how I wanted to approach answering your questions before I logged on here this afternoon with you, Kenny, I really tried to make a commitment to myself to be as honest as I possibly could, because it's not interesting unless it's honest. And so I'll be honest that one of the things that sort of, I think, gave me my initial affinity towards medical malpractice. My father is a physician, and he's retired now, but for 40 years in the Portland, Maine area. And so I felt some kind of initial connection to medical subject, the medical world in the state of Maine from the outset. But I always thought, honestly, I was too stupid to do these cases. I mean, they're really, really hard. Doing anything in litigation involving a physician is extremely challenging because when you're starting out doing it, you feel like I'll never keep up with them. Certainly not on this subject matter. They're all very prominent, very intelligent, and they're really well respected. And so there's a lot that's very hard about medical malpractice cases. When I started out and I was doing defense work, like I said, I liked it. There's a lot of pride in defending a physician or a healthcare practice or a hospital in a medical malpractice case. Ultimately, personally, was really drawn more to the side of this that involves representing individuals. And the opportunity with Ben and Taylor came up. And I have to say, however hard I thought medical malpractice cases were as a defense lawyer, they're much harder as a plaintiff's lawyer because now you're in the seat across the table from physicians. And in terms of the outcomes in these cases, especially outcomes in trials, it's extremely hard. Jurors, they kind of think like, I sure hope that my doctor is really good. I sure hope that doctor didn't do what those plaintiffs' lawyers say that they did. So we're starting out a little bit on the back foot in those cases, understandably. But between the challenge of the cases, the medicine, and the fact that I mean, I'm not saying it's everywhere, but I am saying it's real. Medical malpractice is real. And people really, really need help. I mean, when people call us about medical malpractice cases, I honestly, I think they feel quite a lot more desperate than people who have been victims of other types of negligence, because people feel so helpless in connection to the medical field and the medical world. They feel completely helpless. So being able to step in and talk people through that, represent people, take on cases where there's merit, it's extremely rewarding and important.
Absolutely. And Meryl, in the case that we're going to talk about today, we know the outcome was a $25 million verdict, but let's start from the beginning. What was this case about?
So this case involved the death of a 15-year-old girl. The facts of the case, or I should say the moment in time where this case began, was in July of 2021. The 15-year-old girl, her name was Jazzy. Jazzy at that point in her life was going into her junior year of high school, and she was a cheerleader. She was a dancer. She was a singer. She was a strong, vibrant, healthy young woman. But in about the middle of July, she starts to have a cough and shortness of breath. Her mother takes her to her pediatrician, and the pediatrician gives her kind of a presumptive diagnosis of pneumonia. Within a couple days, Jazzy developed a really, really unusual and frightening constellation of symptoms. Her breasts became extremely enlarged, swollen, distended, black and blue, and very, very painful. On top of that, the veins in her chest and neck had become engorged, so they were prominent, like popping out. And so her mother called the pediatrician, reported those symptoms. And the pediatrician said, "You should go to the gynecologist." And this was the defendant at trial, the gynecologist. Jazzy goes to see the gynecologist a couple of days after the pediatrician recommends that. The gynecologist is able to get her in the Monday morning that mom calls. Jazzy presents with all of these same symptoms in her chest, on top of the coughing and shortness of breath that she'd had. So she's got a highly unusual picture. The first thing the gynecologist does is tries to get records from the pediatrician's office to figure out what had been going on that had brought Jazzy to the pediatrician. Gets those records, but never looks at them. The gynecologist didn't even take basic vital signs for this 15-year-old girl with all of these unusual symptoms, all of which were coming from her chest. No respiratory rate, no heart rate, no temperature, none of it. No oxygen saturation. This is a 15-year-old with symptoms, a constellation of symptoms. This gynecologist who saw her admitted she'd never seen once in her entire career. And then the gynecologist diagnoses Jazzy without running a single test, without ordering any lab work, any imaging, any test whatsoever, decides that she's going to diagnose Jazzy with a condition called gynecomastia. The name doesn't really matter. What matters is that if you look up gynecomastia, you will see that it is a condition that affects men who take anabolic steroids. So it is a condition characterized by the growth of breast tissue in males, not in teenage girls. So the gynecologist makes that diagnosis and recommends that Jazzy stop taking the prednisone she'd been put on by the pediatrician to help her breathe a little bit better, and just sends her home and says, follow up with the pediatrician. And over the next 4 days, Jazzy's mom followed up with the pediatrician. Jazzy wasn't getting any better. Jazzy's mom told the pediatrician, well, the gynecologist diagnosed Jazzy with this gynecomastia thing. So the pediatrician thought that's what was going on too. And after the 4th day, Jazzy's mom decided she was going to take Jazzy to the emergency room because she wasn't getting any better. And now mom is really, really worried. She'd been worried, but now she's really worried.
Mill, just to back up a moment in time, the reason that the pediatrician initially sends this young woman to the gynecologist, what's the reason for that?
There were 2 reasons, I believe, as I recall. The first was that on the day mom called, the pediatrician did not have a spot to see her, did not have room to see Jazzy. The other reason was that the complaints mom raised were centered on breasts. And because gynecologists are specialists in not just delivering babies, but in women's health and reproductive health related issues, the pediatrician recommended the gynecologist.
And
So
going
that
to the yeah, and then the gynecologist, the explanation for diagnosing this young girl with a condition that men have,
right. Yeah. What was her explanation about why?
right?
Yeah. She didn't have a good one. Her explanation about why was that she had, and this is close to what she wrote in her actual note, which was that she'd heard of rare case reports of prednisone induced gynecomastia. She couldn't think of anything else except this rare condition that she'd only ever heard of, never seen, never diagnosed, certainly not in a 15-year-old girl, and admitted she didn't even look up on this day when she diagnosed Jazzy with the condition. It was just something she'd heard of in rare case reports and thought, well, the only there her thinking was there's a temporal relationship between when Jazzy started prednisone and when these symptoms came on. I think that was her ultimate thinking, but we certainly made the case at trial for all of the reasons why this simply didn't fit at all. And it's not only that it didn't fit, but if you look it up, if you take 20 seconds and even enter it into Google, you will see that it's a condition that affects men and boys.
I
It
mean,
describes male breast tissue growth.
yeah, to me, it sounds like if a family member is kind of mentioning to me, hey, I started this steroid and I had this react, now I've got this in my mind, not a doctor, not standard of care. In my mind, I might say, I wonder if it's a reaction to a steroid. The difference is that's me, is maybe someone's brother, a friend. It's not a medical diagnosis. I mean, it's so upsetting and scary, really, that a specialist, here would render a diagnosis that doesn't even apply to a young woman.
Right, and do so without doing anything to investigate, right? You have a patient who is a child who has you've never seen this before, and you don't order a single test. So I just want to carry the story through all the way
Yeah, yeah.
to its ending, and
Girl, just kind of one last thought here. I'm thinking
yeah,
about is the gynecologist being like, all right, this is a Monday work-in. We've got other Monday work-ins. Okay, here's what's going on. She got a steroid. Hey, gonna take you off the steroid. Seal it. I mean, I wonder if the gynecologist is, hey, it's a Monday morning. I've got a bunch of patients to see. This is, a work-in, walk-in. I'm always wondering kind of the why behind all of it. But please get mom eventually takes Jazzy to the emergency room.
Yeah, well, but before I talk about what happens from the emergency room forward, I do want to say your instincts are right. First of all, it was a Monday that Jazzy was in to see this gynecologist. It was an acute visit or something that was put onto the gynecologist's calendar at the last minute. She was on call that day, so she was seeing patients both in her office and at the hospital. She had a busy day. And, it kind of looks like what you're suggesting. But the truth was, when we started to shape the case up for trial, that really wasn't the most compelling thing. And frankly, it's more excusable than we'd like to think it is because we all have busy days. We all have times when something lands in our lap that we don't love or that we have to rush through because this wasn't expected. So that really wasn't the direction we took things in. But I just want to say, Kenny, your instincts are totally right about your thinking on that.
Remember, it's so funny. As I was saying it, I was thinking, well, hold on now. I don't want to create sympathy for the doctor in that she was doing her best that day. And
Right.
she had so many patients and was doing her absolute best. And my goodness, but
The
thank
the
you.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the defense always has a way of injecting the being a doctor is hard. It's really hard. They do their best, and sometimes they get it wrong. And you know what? If I were a defense lawyer still, I'd go to town with that because it's right. It's true. But so to just continue on with what happens when mom takes Jazzy to the emergency department. Jazzy goes to her local emergency department and she quickly has a chest x-ray. Is the logical thing to do because this is a child who's got shortness of breath, coughing, all of these very unusual symptoms in her breasts. Something is happening in her chest. She gets a basic chest x-ray, which was, oh man, I wish I could pull it up on the screen right now. But if you look at it as a person who doesn't read radiology, doesn't really know left from right on an x-ray or any kind of imaging study, you can still tell something is really wrong because there is white everywhere where there should be black. Black is typically air. White means there's fluid or some other inflammatory material. And there was fluid all throughout her lungs. So there was fluid in the lining that surrounded her lungs. And they continue. So the small emergency department where she initially went saw that and said, we need to transfer her to a higher level of care. This is not good. So Jazzy is transferred. She's taken by ambulance to our large tertiary care center in the southern Maine area, Maine Medical Center, where she's admitted to the pediatric ICU. And then they do further testing and discover she also has quite a bit of fluid around her heart. There are sacs that contain the heart and the lungs. The lining can become irritated and have fluid build up inside. And once enough fluid accumulates around the heart or lungs, it compromises how they function. And that can grow and grow and grow to a point where it will just cause heart and lungs, your whole cardiopulmonary system to fail. So, but by the time Jazzy got to Maine Medical Center, it was far too late. In fact, it was too late by the time she'd already gotten to the emergency room. Although both hospitals made an effort, especially Maine Medical Center, in trying to save her. She went into cardiac arrest about 2 weeks shy of her 16th birthday. And we ended up finding out after the fact that what had caused all of that fluid build up was actually, the hospital had run a number of tests some of which came back before she passed, others of which actually came back after she passed. One of those tests that came back after she passed was a test of abnormal cells in the fluid around her lungs that showed that she actually had a form of pediatric cancer, but a form of pediatric cancer that was highly treatable. I'm talking she would have been, had she gone to the hospital sooner, she would have had the fluid around her heart and lungs treated easily and effectively. It would have been discovered that she had cancer, and she would have been treated for her cancer. And she would have not only gone on to continue to grow up and be a healthy, thriving young woman, she would have been completely cured of cancer. That's how curable that form of cancer is. So that's the story.
My goodness.
So originally, in bringing the case, both the pediatrician and the gynecologist were in the case. But at trial, the only defendant was the gynecologist. And so what we argued, we did quite a lot of work to really simplify the case. And I'd be remiss if I didn't say, the thing that is the real big lesson learned for me in this case. It is that if you're going to focus your time on one thing, getting ready for a trial, especially in a medical case, it's simplifying the case. Because we took what medically is somewhat of a complicated case with complicated medicine, and we made it as simple as possible. So what we argued was this gynecologist had a patient that had highly unusual symptoms, all coming from her chest. They didn't look at the records from the pediatrician, which had important information that would have informed her decision-making. They didn't give her
What
basic
was that important information that was contained in the pediatrician's records?
Yeah. For example, that at the last visit to her pediatrician, which was about 4 days earlier, Jazzy had an elevated respiratory rate and low oxygen saturation and an elevated heart rate, I think, too. So, and there was actually a note in that record from the pediatrician that said, given vital signs, monitor closely. Now, we don't know because no vital signs were taken once she got to the gynecologist. But if on top of all the other symptoms we knew about, Jazzy was also tachypnic, so breathing too fast, or tachycardic, that her heart rate is really high. Those two things signal something is going on that's not good. Or she could also continue to have depressed oxygen saturation. That's something that would have been really important to know, because it's like now this child not only has all of these symptoms, but she's tachypnic and tachycardic, and she's got low oxygen saturation. Something is going on in her lungs. Something is going on with her respiratory system or with her cardiac function. That's basic medicine.
Of course.
Yeah.
So when I'm thinking about the temporal element, what did y'all do to prove that had the gynecologist chosen to run the appropriate test and provide reasonable care, that this young woman would still be with us, in the sense of, because if no tests are done, what do we do to prove what her condition was at the gynecologist and establish that the condition was reversible?
Yeah. So the way we did that was through two excellent expert witnesses who testified at the trial. The first was a pulmonology, so lungs and critical care doctor from Dartmouth Hitchcock Medical Center in Lebanon, New Hampshire. He was fantastic. And essentially, the role he played was to say, we know that at the end of Jazzy's life, she had fluid around her lungs and fluid around her heart that had been building up for some time. And we can date it back to before she was at the gynecologist, because based upon her symptoms at the pediatrician and her symptoms at the gynecologist, those symptoms are consistent with fluid around the heart and lungs. So we know that on the date she went to the gynecologist, Jazzy had this fluid around her heart and her lungs. And based upon how bad it was, on the day that she passed, because we can see how bad it was on imaging, we know, for example, they drew 1.5 liters of fluid out of her lungs. So that's like, imagine a 2-liter soda bottle, 3/4 of that. That's how much fluid they took out of her lungs. He explained to the jury when we had him, standing up at different medical graphics that we use, very simple graphics that just show the interior of the chest cavity, the heart, the lungs, the sacs that contain the heart and lungs, the venous or the vasculature around, to show how the distended veins in her chest and in her neck were also consistent with this fluid buildup. And he said, had she had that chest x-ray, so that's the real test we're talking about. It's just a basic chest x-ray. Had she had that chest x-ray she had on the last day of her life, 4 days earlier when she was at the gynecologist, number one, it would have showed this fluid. And number two, it would have been at a time when it would have been much easier to drain this fluid because, and he explained this all very well, it's especially true with children when they're sick, they can actually compensate quite a lot better than most adults can. When adults are sick like this, they show a gradual decompensation, whereas children, when they're sick, they can kind of hang out at what appears to be an okay place and then plummet. But he said 4 days would have made all the difference in the world. The fluid would have been drained, and then and her life would have been saved, right? We also had to have another expert to close the loop on this, which it was a pediatric oncologist. We had a pediatric oncologist from Children's Hospital of Alabama come in, and I mean, he testified for maybe 15 minutes. His only role in the case was to say her cancer would have been diagnosed and she would have been treated and she would have gone on to live a normal, healthy, active life. And in fact, she would have been completely cured.
And
So,
and this pediatric oncologist, did he or she treat the type of cancer that Jazzy had?
yeah. Yep. That was the focus of his practice.
If
Yeah,
you would have gotten her to me, I could have saved her life.
exactly. Exactly.
As far as attitudes toward mom, or toward dad, tell us about that.
I I'm glad you asked this question because this is one of my favorite moments, or I guess topics of the entire trial experience. Jazzy's mom is a single mom. She raised Jazzy entirely on her own, and Jazzy had other sisters, other siblings. They had a different father, but Jazzy's father was never in her life. When we met mom and took her on as a client, oh, a few months after Jazzy passed, she was, I mean, I'm not going to do it justice trying to describe it, but about as raw as you could imagine a human being. This mom had already lived a life thinking that everyone's out to get her and not trusting, feeling like, the system is against her. And then this happened. And it was hard to earn her trust. It really, really was. She was extremely raw and she was that way for a very long time. And when it comes to getting ready for a trial, trying to get and mom had an important role in terms of testifying because she had to talk about her daughter. She had to talk about the fact that she was there when her daughter died. Watching her daughter die was, uh, let me tell you, the testimony of listening to that was horrible. I can't begin to imagine what it was like to be her in that moment. And no one would want to, and I hope, you know, I hope no one really has to. But my colleague who I tried the case with, Ben Gideon, when we were preparing for the trial, he came to me and he said, because we decided far in advance what our respective roles were going to be. We when we try a case together, we tend to take on the similar roles, and I almost always do the examination of our client. It's something that I feel I really enjoy, and it's a lot of work because they're so highly scrutinized, right? Especially mom, where a child is sick and a child passes away. I mean, we knew we were it's very real that there's number one, just a lot of bias against the parents. Why didn't the parents do more? Why didn't the parents know? Why didn't the parents do this? Right. And then that can become even worse for moms. Mom, mom, you should have known. Mom, you should have done more. You should have been smarter. All of that. We knew we were going to run into that.
No, I mean, I've seen moms have it so hard, and that if mom is educated or mom has any medical training, mom should have known better. And if mom does not have that training, it's like, well, look at her. It's just it's so mean. And
It really is.
it's so dismissive and imbalanced. So for you kind of walking that line and working on her presentation. I mean, again, just in the short time that we've been together, I'm thinking, yeah, Meryl would be tremendous at that.
It, it was, I, it's very hard. But so Ben came to me as we were preparing for the trial, and he said, Meryl, there are, we have in the file audio recording of calls that mom made to the pediatrician in the 4 days between when Jazzy saw the gynecologist and when mom took Jazzy to the emergency department. He said, all of these phone calls are with the pediatrician. So it's a little bit risky, right? Because it doesn't have, like, the gynecologist is not being discussed. The gynecologist is not present in the phone call, but mom is. You can hear on every single one of these phone calls just how insistent and thoughtful and detailed and patient she was, And so what Ben said was, I want you to play every single one of those phone calls with mom during her direct exam. And I listened to all of the calls and I went through them with mom as we were getting ready for trial. And I thought, oh man, like, I don't know about this. I really don't. Because, but, but as we were preparing and I was sitting in a conference room with her, hours on hours, playing these phone calls with her, watching her sit there in silence and listen to herself and reflect on this, I thought, oh my God, I actually think this is going to work. Here's why. First of all, mom never had to say, this is what I did, and this is what I was thinking, and then I did this, and I wanted this, and I was thinking that, and no. We used the phone calls to recreate the entire thing. So mom had to explain nothing. But it also took away this thing that we always have to deal with in trials, which is you have someone months, years, usually years after the thing, reflecting on what they were thinking and what they were doing way back when. Naturally, people are going to see it differently, especially in an adversarial setting, right? But these were just such raw, clear, and very real depictions of just how hard mom worked in real time. And that's what we want to come through, is just how hard mom tried and over and over and over again. So we did the direct, and I must have played 45 minutes easily worth of audio recorded phone calls with the pediatrician, between mom and the pediatrician. And they're, mom's serious, but she's laughing. She's stressed, but she's also trying to not get too overly stressed. And it was just, and watching her, like I watched her sit through that in the trial, and I could just, if I sat there thinking, if I were a juror, I'd be listening to these calls, but I'd also be watching mom to see how she reacts to this. And but what I wanted to say in the end was it ended up working out really well, I think, because it took the burden off of mom of needing to explain, but it was as authentic to what happened in real time as we could possibly get. It was the most authentic evidence we presented at the trial in that respect.
What did y'all do with the gynecologist
In terms of the examination,
in terms of the examination?
yeah. Ben did the examination of the gynecologist, and it was really, I think that was one of the best moments of the trial. I took the gynecologist's deposition during the litigation, and frankly, she presented very well. I thought she was a very, and she is. Let me be clear. She is a thoughtful, kind person. On this occasion, that there were things she should have done differently. But she presented very well. She was thoughtful. She had an explanation for why she was thinking what she did. But when she came into the trial, she was different. She really throughout, and Ben's very good at this. He's just a very methodical cross examiner, and he never I think after many years of crossing the line too much, he's deliberate about the way he goes about cross-examining. And he spent such a long time just going through the timeline and eliciting information through her from the medical records. But he was very patient. He was very, very patient. And through that patience, the gynecologist, like it was like a contest of patience between Ben and the gynecologist. And she ended up starting to like lose ground on the patient's contest because there were moments where she would say things that I thought that were just not true. And I thought the jury could see it. That really affected how she presented overall, right? Like if you look at the bulk of her testimony, she did mostly a good job, but there were moments where she said things that caused people to be like, what? So we had a very, very stoic jury. They did not show emotion at all. But I remember through Ben's cross examination, the gynecologist ended up saying something like, oh, well, we never take vital signs in our office. And I saw the foreperson, a woman on the jury, look at the gynecologist and kind of like furrow her brow and sit back and look up like, that can't be true. You see pregnant women. And 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 that was the first moment I saw that body language and that facial expression, and I thought, I think that's good. And and Ben, at the very end of what was a longer cross-examination of the gynecologist, he asked her some kind of question to the effect of, if you had another
Mhm.
patient like Jazzy Vincent in your office again today, would you do the same thing? And she said, yes. And then he said something like, even knowing that child would go on and die? And she said, yes. And it was like a take the oxygen out of the room kind of moment. I was like, oh man. Like I said, she was a very nice person. I think, I wonder about how she was prepared to handle moments like that, right? So it ended up being a very, very strong cross-examination because Ben was very patient with her. He was very kind with her, and she ended up just saying some things because I think she was stressed out.
Yeah. how did the 25 million in terms of, and I'm not sure about Maine if you have closing and kind of second close or what we call rebuttal, if you're allowed to give the jurors a number, even if it's got the context of, based on the law and evidence, yeah, right verdict for the right reasons. But the 25 million number, tell us about that.
Yeah. So we are in Maine, the rebuttal closing is permitted. And in state court, you can ask for a certain number. And Ben did the closing, and he did not ask, but he suggested that the case was worth $25 million. And then, reminded jurors that it's up to them. He said, some of you may think it's worth more. Some of you may think it's worth less. It's up to you. But the one thing he did say was that he explained to the jurors how there were going to be two lines on the verdict form in the third category, which is the damages category. The first line was going to be for the wrongful death of Jazzy Vincent. That's a claim under Maine law that belongs to mom as the beneficiary of the estate. The second line was for Jazzy's conscious pre-death pain and suffering. Under Maine law, the wrongful death claim, number one, is capped, but the pain and suffering claim is not capped. But what Ben asked the jury to do, he said, if you are inclined to award money, all we would ask is that you put more on the line for Jazzy than you do for mom, because mom would never want to think that you valued her and her losses more than you valued her daughter and her suffering. When the trial ended, it was about 4:00 on a Thursday, and the courthouse closes at 4:00. So I wasn't really sure what the judge was going to do with the jury, and he said, "I'm going to keep them here for an hour till 5 p.m. just to see if they can make any progress." I said, "I don't want to have them hear all that and then just send them home." So about an hour goes by. I'm sitting in the hallway, and a paralegal who's inside the courtroom, sitting in the courtroom, pops her head out and she goes, "There's a note." So we go back into chambers, and the judge says, here's what the note says. They want to know, in considering damages, is there any precedent that they can rely on? And I was like, they're on to damages. That's good. But we have, but it's not over yet. Because that could go sideways too. But we felt good after that. The judge reminds the jury, no. The answer is no, nothing other than my instructions and the evidence that you heard during the trial. And so I thought, now what are we going to do? Is he going to keep them there longer? I don't know. He didn't say, but I just sat there thinking, okay, well, he must want to keep them a little longer because he knows they're close to reaching a verdict. And 25 minutes later, my paralegal came back out again and she said, "There's a verdict." In Maine, the custom for the return of the verdict is that the jury comes back into the courtroom. The foreperson hands the verdict form to the marshal, who hands it to the judge so that he or she can look at it to make sure it's been filled out correctly. And then the judge hands it down below to his clerk to read out loud and into the record. It's such a stressful process to watch this friggin' document float from the jury box to the marshal, to the judge, then down to the clerk. And I'll tell you, when it gets up to the level of the judge, and I remember this has happened to me multiple times, I'm like, gonna throw up, because if the judge's eyes, like, I'm like I can tell what the verdict's going to be from what the judge's facial expression is. One time, though, I did see a judge open the verdict form and his eyes wide, like, oh my God. And that ended up actually being a huge verdict. But in this case, judge looks at it completely like no reaction. I thought, hands it down to the clerk. And the clerk goes to read it into the record and he says, on the wrongful death line, on the, in the matter of, so it says, yes, negligence, yes, causation, which was not a surprise to me because I knew they'd reach the damages question. So question 3, what amount do you award for the wrongful death of Jasmine Vincent? $10 million. I thought, that's great, but that amount's going to get reduced by the statutory cap. And then he went on to read, what amount do you award for the pain and suffering of Jasmine Vincent? $15 million. And I honestly, I don't know, this is one of the things it's so fascinating to me about that moment. I mean, it is the most stressful moment of the whole thing. And I swear I must black out a little bit because there are pieces I just can't remember. And I end up with oh, how did I lose my this or do that? I don't have memory of it. But what I do clearly remember is going outside in the hallway and being like, I think we just made history. But then I had to call Mom because she was not there for the return of the verdict. She did not want to be there for the return of the verdict because, loss aversion. She was more afraid of being there and losing than about being there and winning. Called her and she just burst into tears. She kept saying, this is for Jazzy, this is for Jazzy, this is for Jazzy. Honestly, I can't fathom the amount of hardship that woman has been through in her life. But I really hope that was one of the best moments of her life. I don't know, but I hope.
Finally know that someone valued her family, valued her words.
And her daughter. Yeah.
Meryl, tremendous work. Thank you for sharing the story at the heart of the case. You're in Maine. Y'all do
Yes.
amazing work. Do you practice in other jurisdictions as well?
Yeah, we actually we're trying to take cases all over if we can, but we do work in New Hampshire, Vermont, Massachusetts, on a more regular basis. But Ben and I actually are working on a case out in California right now, which is a first for me and really interesting and exciting.
Share with folks the best way for them to get in touch with you. And do you focus primarily on medical malpractice or almost exclusively on medical malpractice?
That's a good question. I'd say we're not focused. We're not trying to focus majority on medical malpractice. It just turns out that about half of the cases in our practice are medical malpractice cases, and the other half are personal injury cases. But I wouldn't say that we're primarily focused on medical malpractice by any means. And in terms of getting in touch with us through the website, our website, www.gideonason.com, my email is there. Hopefully my cell phone is not there, but I'm one of those people who tends to give it out more than I should. So that's me.
The same thing. Do you mind sharing your cell phone number?
Not at all. Not at all. So I'm happy to report that Maine has one area code 207-939-9206.
Thank you very much. We had Taylor on previously, and we were talking about expected values, and at the same time, expected values over a broad range doesn't always account for single event outliers. And but he just did a tremendous job of kind of addressing expected values, but also decision making within the framework of a single case for a single family. It was excellent. It was excellent.
Taylor is one of the most intellectual people I have ever met in my life. So I think between the two of you, came up with a very good topic to allow him to pontificate. And, but yeah, he really understands that stuff so well. It always amazes me because I'm like, explain that again.
Yeah, the Monty Hall problem. I'm sure he would have a great time with. Listen, Meryl, thank you. It was wonderful getting to spend some time with you for as horrific and tragic and kind of the worst nightmare situation that this family went through. I'm glad that you and Ben and y'all's firm could be there to provide civil justice. So thank you for the incredible amount of work that obviously went into this as well.
Yeah, thank you, Kenny. I really am grateful to be on your podcast and to have an opportunity to talk with you and your listeners about this case. Hopefully, this process helps someone else out there represent a family who needs it and succeed. Because especially in cases where children are lost, it's like, I don't know. I don't know. This system, I don't think this system is really set up to deliver on what at least common people think it's supposed to deliver on, but there are moments.
Yeah, there are moments. Thank you for helping create one.
For sure. Thank you, Ken.
Everyone, this has been Best Practices with Kenny Berger. Our guest today, Maine, New England national trial lawyer, Meryl Poulin, and we look forward to y'all being with us on the next episode. Everyone, take care. Thanks for listening to Best Practices with Kenny Berger. This podcast is produced by my law office. We are a trial firm based in South Carolina focused on life-changing injury and wrongful death cases. Here's the deal. If you find these conversations useful, if you think they've benefited you or might help somebody else, please follow the show and share it with other trial lawyers who might appreciate it. Lastly, thank you so much for listening, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Take care.